bucur să te revăd, Alexandra. A rămas din discuția noastră anterioară, am vorbit un pic spre final despre vulnerabilitate și cred că este un subiect foarte important pentru că sunt foarte multe persoane care consideră vulnerabilitatea ca fiind un defect sau o slăbiciune. Deci vreau să lămurim un pic asta pentru că inclusiv eu am avut așa niște sentimente cumva contradictorii vis-a-vis de vulnerabilitate și în trecut, la rândul meu, consideram vulnerabilitatea proprie ca fiind o emoție sau un sentiment pe care nu trebuia nu știu, să-l arăt lumii în jurul meu, pentru că ar fi putut cineva să mă rănească foarte mult. Acum însă am o altă percepție și aș vrea să ne explici tu un pic, din punct de vedere și științific, dar și din punct de vedere al experienței pe care o ai în lucrul cu clienții. Ce este vulnerabilitatea și este cumva vulnerabilitatea o armă secretă pe care am putea să o folosim în beneficiul nostru?
Thank you so much, Alexandra, for having me. It's always such a pleasure to be here. And I'm really enjoying the subject tonight. You know, vulnerability is a big thing in humans and us in general. I actually took the liberty here to write a quote down, and not only a quote, but it's a definition of vulnerability. And it seemed really intriguing to me. And the definition of vulnerability in psychology is the willingness to take a risk, to show emotion and provide honest expression despite the fears.
Hmm.
And I
Foarte.
really enjoyed the way you said că nu trebuie să fim vulnerabili. And that's a core belief that's actually conditioned through our society or through our culture as well. And the thing about vulnerability, and what's interesting, because vulnerability goes hand in hand with anxiety, with fears, with the unknown, and the brain always loves to know the known. It doesn't like to not know the unknown. It also goes hand in hand with judgment and feeling inaccurate, feeling that you're not how you're supposed to be. What are others going to think of you? So again, those are fears. So when we're talking about vulnerability, we're talking about a condition of fears as well, and anxiety. So with that being said, we're vulnerable to things that we fear or that are unknown, or we feel judgment. So therefore, at the end, if we're not being vulnerable, and the way you said, what can we do to use that for positivity, to use that for us, throughout us? And the thing is that what we can be is, at the end of the day, we're being honest with ourselves. We're being honest with ourselves. Therefore, if we're being vulnerable, and we're being honest regardless of the consequences, because that's the fear of the consequence of the unknown. If we're going to be vulnerable, what's going to happen? And one thing we know for certain is what's going to happen is that we're honest with ourselves.
Cred că asta, de fapt, e cea mai mare problemă, știi, că nu suntem poate obișnuiți să fim onești cu noi înșine, ne e frică chiar de propriile gânduri uneori. Și îți vorbesc un pic despre vulnerabilității, inclusiv în terapii, orice tip de terapie, că vorbim despre cele pe care ești tu specializată, sau, mă rog, în orice fel de afecțiune, cred că vulnerabilitatea este o componentă esențială care duce spre vindecare.
Absolutely. And that's, I remember in one of our last episodes, you asked me how clients are treated when they're coming into treatment and how they're feeling and if they're shamed, and they are vulnerable. You know, it's the most vulnerablest thing to walk into the doors of seeking support, of putting your faith into people that you don't even know, maybe, you know, professionals. And not only that, but the way we talked in our previous episodes about being open about your issues and your traumas and what's going on and how you're feeling, or your plans of the world, anything to do with being vulnerable. And that's the only true way to receive healing, because like I've said before, you're actually, if you're being dishonest, you're actually not just being dishonest to the world or to an individual. At the end of the day, you're being dishonest with yourself. And the question is, what's the reason you're feeling unable to be vulnerable? What are you fearing? And I can talk more afterwards about fear and conditioning about fear, but I do want to stick with the fact that vulnerability and our fears and what we're fearing has to do with our conditioning in our society. Therefore, if it can even be communicating our feelings. If we were raised in a home with crying is seen as a negative vulnerability and you're showing weakness in a negative way, with that being said, you'll grow up to believe that crying is a weakness. Therefore, every time you are feeling vulnerable, you're fearing, you're scared, you're worried, you're feeling something, you don't have the opportunity to actually be vulnerable and express that. Therefore, in the long run, it's affecting you. It's affecting you physically, mentally, your behavior around the world. So at the end of the day, as much as you might be not wanting someone to know something or you're not expressing how you're truly feeling, you're actually hurting yourself and the way you're being in the world and your relationship to life.
Cred de asemenea, e foarte interesant ce ai spus adineauri și mă gândeam că, apropo de condiționările acestea, vulnerabilitatea mai degrabă este acceptată femeilor și mai puțin bărbaților în familie. Este, cred că și aceasta o condiționare, nu? A băieților de mici, mai bine nu plângi, ești bărbat, trebuie să fii puternic, trebuie să nu arăți slab. Și ulterior, asta ce consecințe are pentru adultul bărbat, care după aia, nu știu, poate devine tată sau soț întâi și apoi tată.
Yeah.
Cum se întâmplă acolo?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's it's a huge conditioning. And not only it's a huge conditioning, but we see it so much in treatment and in day-to-day lives. And what happens is you become overwhelmed. You feel there's a core belief there that for some reason, because you were born a male, you need to take all this on, and God forbid you show some emotion, basically. And if you do, that means something negative. That means maybe your wife looks down upon you, your family, or anything is going on. Therefore, with that being said, when we have a conditioning to believe that the fear that we're fearing is actually reality, it's actually our own narrative that is saying that. Therefore, it might not be reality to me, and I might be like, "What do you mean? Like, that's okay, like, that's normal." Right? But to that person, it seems very, very real. Therefore, the only way we can actually express it is if we communicate it, and we realize that regardless of what we're going through, we must not be we're obviously not the only ones going through this, and it's very normal. And what happens is that you think for some reason, our brain kind of thinks that if we're just going to shove everything down and be able to take it all, and we just run fast, we're going to be able to do it. It's okay. I'll just deal with it. I don't need to show anyone. I don't want to worry my wife. I don't want to let someone know. And that could be even with an illness or even mental health issue or an issue. It can be with multiple things. So what we're actually doing is we're causing more issues in the long term. In short term, it's actually benefiting us, or we think it is. It's an illusion practically that it is. Long term, it's going to cause more side effects, and it's going to be even harder for us to be vulnerable and open regardless, because now we're feeling shame and guilt that we haven't been honest and we've been keeping this. So therefore, once we're able to be vulnerable and open ourselves up to whatever that is, now we have a new situation in place. Is how do we live in the world with whatever we said, or how can we cope with it? So as much as you're feeling vulnerable, you've already moved up to the next step, which is something incredible. That's what we want. We want to move forward. Therefore, keeping it in is actually creating that mountain that we just kind of feel overwhelmed that we're unable to move from.
Mi-am notat câteva idei că pe măsură ce vorbești îmi vin foarte multe alte idei și mă gândesc că sunt foarte fericită că o să avem teme de discuții foarte multe. Mă gândeam, pentru că și eu cunosc genul acesta de persoane și sunt convinsă că noi toți cunoaștem. Sunt persoane care, de exemplu, obișnuiesc să bage mizeria sub preș, gândindu-se că ea nu mai există. Sau, mă rog, așa își creează un pattern și cumva ei cred că mizeria nu mai există dacă nu o mai văd. Și am văzut nu odată exact ceea ce spuneai. Că mizeria aceea, asigurat, întotdeauna se întoarce sub o formă sau alta. Că este boală fizică, că este boală psihică, sau că ceva se întâmplă, sau că e o adicție, sau... Și mă gândeam dacă ai putea să explici un pic procesul acesta și mai mult decât atât, dacă o persoană care, nu știu, ne urmărește, se află în situația aceasta și probabil că, nu știu, acum conștientizează, poate să sperăm că acum conștientizează că are acest mecanism. Cum ar putea să se debaraseze de mecanismul acesta? Și dacă ai putea să ne explici câteva strategii, dacă există strategii prin care să învățăm să devenim vulnerabili și în același timp să înțelegem că prin a fi vulnerabil înseamnă de fapt să ne oferim posibilitatea să ne vindecăm și să ne arătăm pe noi înșine cum suntem cu adevărat.
That's a wonderful question. And yeah, there's a lot of options out there, of course. And I've mentioned this before, is going to see a psychologist, a therapist is always the best to work within. But if not, it's starting to look within yourself. And it depends what you want to be vulnerable about, of course. And depending on the subject, there's different means and different resources. But let's take the example of being honest about something, which, we all of us have relationships. And when I talk about relationships, not necessarily intimate relationship, and that's a key factor. It can be the relationship we have towards life. It could be the relationship we have with a professor, with anybody in our life. And let's say we are not being honest. And when I'm saying not being honest, it could be that we're doing an activity that we don't actually enjoy. It could be anything. So in the same time, what happens is that we need to realize that we're not actually giving our inner consent to whatever is happening. Therefore, we're not being in the world in a positive way. So as soon as we're entering something that doesn't quite fit for us, then it's not even going to feel good. So as much as we're putting on that mask or whatever we're trying to hide under, we're actually gaining more. And another thing that kind of popped in my head, and this is kind of to talk about that social aspect, is about Yerushine. Don't talk about it, nu spălăm rusele afară, or what is that? It's something in Romanian. And it's, yes, and that's true in the sense, maybe we don't share everything, but in the same time to pretend, that's overwhelming.
Mm.
That is so
Da.
overwhelming. Like, that is exhausting. And another thing that I just wanted to tie up with vulnerability that someone has to really understand before they realize to seek support, or what they're fearing, that if this comes out, what is the world going to think? Again, that's the fear of judgment, right?
Mhm.
If you're fearing something, that's anxiety. And let's talk about vulnerability, because this quote here says really good, and I'm going to read it again. Willingness to take a risk, to show emotion and provide honesty, expression despite fears. And I said this again because it underlines fears. And this is where it comes into our fears are a condition of our upbringing. Whatever we were upbringing, our social aspect, psychological, what we were taught. Therefore, as a human, when we come into this world, the only two fears we're actually born with is falling and loud noises. That's it. That's it. Only two fears. So let's think about that. So now we're talking about vulnerability, and vulnerability is tied to fears. And now I just said that we're only actually born with two fears. And an individual like myself as well, I have more than two fears. I wish I only had two fears. That would be a great world to just have two fears. I have more than two. So then the question comes, what brought these fears? And that's a conditioning, and it's a conditioning of the world around me. And it's the belief that I have towards that fear, which is my personal narrative, which can be real, or it can be false, or it could be in between. Therefore, when I'm fearing something and I'm fearing to be vulnerable, the fears that I'm fearing are the ones that are conditioned to me. Therefore, I'm the only one putting the jail cells, the jail bars in front of me, and blocking myself from being vulnerable, because I'm saying, oh no, I can't tell so-and-so, because if I do, they're going to think this and that about me. And then your question was, what are some techniques or things that we could do?
Mhm.
A technique that we use in therapy is, it's called bringing your fears to court.
Mhm.
And it's quite interesting. So we play the game is, if you were a lawyer and you had to go to court and you had to go show evidence that this fear is real, 100 billion %, and not hearsay, evidence, full on evidence. Okay. If you had to bring full on evidence and say, like, I can't say this because if I do, they're going to hate me. Oh, okay. Okay. Who's going to hate you? Like, do you know for certain, like, what proof do you have that they're going to hate you, or 100%? And even if you do, then the question is, okay, can you live with that? What can you do about that? Is there, if they're being, is it them being upset more valuable or more important or more damaging or enduring than you living this way? Or not saying it or not seeking support. And like I said, most of the fears are actually not necessarily real, because regardless, where there's a will, there's a way. Always. And I think we've learned that even through addiction, right? And that's something with anything, right? You can hide all the substances you want in the world and you can contain them, but there's a will, there's a way, right? And that's the same way. Like if the mind wants it, you're going to get it. So with that being said, with fears, one thing that you can start with, the first thing, is to look at your narrative towards that fear and your core beliefs. And of course, I can go more into another episode what core beliefs are and how you can search those. And that's a whole other ball game over there, which is, it's quite interesting. And it's everything. Our core beliefs very much are the foundation of the way we perceive things, act on things, feel about things, and the barriers that we put within ourselves.
Cred că putem să încheiem episodul acesta așa de minunat, cum ai terminat tu, și să vorbim data viitoare despre core beliefs. Mulțumim tare mult, Alexandra, pentru explicațiile tale de astăzi.
Thank you so much, and it was such a pleasure seeing you again. Have a wonderful night.